China just silently shifted $8 trillion in financial assets, a sum larger than the entire economies of Germany and Japan combined. This massive restructuring isn't standard financial maneuvering. It is a coordinated preparation for total economic warfare against Western markets. This terrifying sequence of events has occurred exactly 3 times before in recorded history with the same devastating outcome. Economists ignore this 4-stage pattern because it reveals a dangerous truth about how rising powers dismantle established empires. We are no longer in the early stages of cooperation. We are deep into stage 3, where collision becomes mathematically inevitable. Stage 1 is the foundation of dual dependency, where 2 major economic powers become deeply intertwined through massive trade flows. Politicians celebrate this interconnection as a guarantee of permanent peace, believing that shared commercial interests make war impossible. Stage 2 is asymmetric accumulation, where the rising power quietly gains strategic leverage while the dominant power grows complacent with debt. Wealth shifts invisibly beneath the surface as one side builds massive reserves and the other accumulates unsustainable liabilities. Stage 3 is strategic repositioning, where the challenging power utilizes its accumulated leverage to build alternative financial structures. They diversify away from the dominant system quietly, preparing for separation without issuing any public warnings or press conferences.
The funds have been
Stage 4 is the controlled demolition,
We have a deal
where
then.
the rising power deliberately triggers a collapse by weaponizing the dependency they built. The established empire cannot respond effectively because they are trapped by their own debt, consumer reliance, and systemic arrogance. To understand our immediate future, we must examine the historical precedents that prove this pattern is undeniably accurate. Between 1900 and 1914, Great Britain was the undisputed global superpower, and London was the center of the financial world. Germany rose quickly, industrializing rapidly and building deep commercial ties with Britain that seemed mutually beneficial and permanent. Yet, Germany quietly reduced its British pound holdings by 60% and accumulated continental Europe's largest gold reserves. German bankers privately discussed financial warfare strategies to trigger bank runs in London years before any military shots were fired. When war began in 1914, Germany immediately froze assets and triggered a liquidity crisis that nearly collapsed the Bank of England. Britain was forced to abandon the financial system that made it a superpower, shattering its economic dominance almost overnight. We see this same terrifying pattern repeated between America and Japan from 1950 to 1990 with striking precision. Initially, the relationship was perfect. Japan rebuilt its industry, and American consumers enjoyed cheap electronics and cars. But starting in 1960, Japan quietly accumulated $300 billion in reserves and bought iconic American real estate. The 1985 Plaza Accord appeared to be international cooperation, but it was actually Japan forcing the dollar to devalue. By 1987, Japan was preparing for a post-American order, threatening to collapse the U.S. financial system. On Black Monday in 1987, coordinated selling from Tokyo triggered the worst single-day market crash in history. America's economy barely survived only because the Federal Reserve intervened with unprecedented money printing to stop the bleeding. Japan proved that financial weapons are more powerful than armies, and China was watching and taking detailed notes. The most recent warning sign occurred between Europe and Russia from 2000 to 2022, following the exact same steps. Germany became fatally dependent on cheap Russian energy, importing 65% of its natural gas from Moscow. European leaders gave speeches about how energy partnerships created peace, blinding themselves to the accumulation of leverage. Meanwhile, Russia quietly built a $600 billion war chest and tripled its gold holdings. They developed their own financial messaging system to bypass SWIFT, preparing for economic separation years in advance. Western intelligence agencies spotted tanks on the border, but completely missed the financial artillery being positioned in bank accounts. When the invasion began, the West imposed massive sanctions, arrogantly believing the Russian economy would collapse in weeks. It didn't collapse because they had prepared. Instead, Russia weaponized energy and sent European inflation soaring. Industries across Europe shut down not because of bombs, but because the energy tap was turned off. Now, China is executing the same playbook, but on a scale that dwarfs both Japan and Russia combined. Stage 1 was completed by 2010, with America outsourcing its entire industrial base to Chinese factories. Everyone celebrated the cheap goods and corporate profits, unaware that they were building the foundation of their own destruction. In Stage 2, China accumulated $3 trillion in reserves and launched the Belt and Road Initiative to bypass Western systems. Now, we are in Stage 3, the great restructuring of $8 trillion in assets to prepare for total separation. They're dumping U.S. treasuries and stockpiling thousands of tons of gold through secret, non-public channels. They have built CIPS, a fully functional alternative to SWIFT, ready to process trillions in trade without touching a single dollar. The most critical signal is the mandatory order for all Chinese state enterprises to divest from Western markets by 2026. This deadline is not a suggestion. It is the final countdown to the launch of Stage 4, controlled demolition. When triggered, China will dump its remaining bond holdings, spiking U.S. interest rates and making debt impossible to finance. Simultaneously, they will choke off the supply of antibiotics, rare earth metals, and essential electronics to the West. Desperate nations will be offered a lifeline. Join China's new yuan-based system or face economic collapse.
Grab the rope.
Do not believe the lie that mutual dependence prevents war.
Help us.
History proves that dependence is exactly what makes economic war possible. Do not believe the dollar is too big to fail. The British pound was the world's reserve currency for a century until it vanished. America cannot simply respond because reshoring manufacturing takes decades, but a supply chain collapse happens in days. This collapse is not a matter of opinion. It is a matter of mathematics, leverage, and inevitable timing. You must understand that the window for action is closing. 2026 is the convergence point for this economic collision. Smart investors are already reducing exposure to assets dependent on Chinese cooperation and shifting away from the dollar. Defense contractors, domestic energy, and hard assets like gold and Bitcoin become the only safe harbors in the coming storm. Beyond finance, you must prepare for physical shortages of medicine and critical tech supplies before the panic starts. The insiders and central banks are selling dollars and buying gold right now because they see the pattern clearly. History is screaming the answer. Those who ignore the shift in power lose everything, while those who position early survive. The $8 trillion move is complete, the trap is set, and the only variable left is whether you will be ready.